for the second race in succession, we've come away from a Grand Prix and we're talking about a race that we thought Ferrari was going to win. And instead, Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes won it. Now, after the Italian Grand Prix, we started talking about if that was bad news for Sebastian Vettel's championship hopes. Now, he's even further behind because the gap is 40 points with just 6 races remaining. I've got Scott Mitchell and Autosport magazine editor Kevin Turner here to talk about the F1 Championship situation after the Singapore Grand Prix. Guys, 40 points, 6 races to go for Vettel. Is this now becoming an insurmountable points margin?
Yeah, I think even by Vettel's own standards of being able to claw back unlikely deficits, I think he's responsible for 2 of the biggest turnarounds, especially in recent years in 2010 and 2012. I think his chance has gone now. You've got Hamilton driving better than ever. You've got Hamilton in a much better car than Alonso had in 2010 and 2012 when Vettel was fighting him. You've got fewer drivers in the mix to take points off them. So I think Vettel faces it would be a rescue job of almost unprecedented proportions if he pulls it off, and I don't see him pulling it off.
Well, let's just look at those numbers, because 10 times in the history of the F1 World Championship, a driver has come from further than this margin behind. We've used our results database, Forex, to convert the previous points systems into the modern point system. So yeah, 10 times in, 67, 68 years now, and 6 times that's been done in the final 6 races. The most notable recent one, of course, being Kimi Räikkönen in 2007. As for Vettel, now, you mentioned 2010 and 2012, Scott. In 2010, he actually produced a 47-point swing on Lewis Hamilton, but that's because Hamilton fell from the lead to 4th, which isn't going to happen this time. As you said, there were more drivers able to take points off of the title contenders. We haven't got that now. The championship is a 2-horse race. And 2012, I think the gap was 39 points with 7 races to go over Alonso. But that, we're not talking. Lewis Hamilton is not in a 2012 Ferrari. That car was at times a shed that Alonso turned into a championship contender somehow. So Kev, looking at the historical data and just the fact that this is quite rare, where is the hope for Vettel?
Well, it's mathematical, isn't it? I think realistically, it's kind of done. It's interesting how it's changed after Spa. I thought, all right, here comes Seb. He's going to come through. The Ferrari looks a quicker car. I think Lewis himself turned around Monza and scored that. Oh, that's made it interesting. Now we've got a real fight to the end, but Vettel's going to start his comeback in Singapore. And not only did Hamilton win, the Mercedes actually looked faster across the race.
Which we haven't seen in Singapore for a long time.
No, exactly. So now you're into the situation where I think Vettel and Ferrari are probably thinking it's slipping away. Most of those 10 examples of change around, something quite important has happened. Someone's got further ahead artificially with a slow car because of reliability problems, or someone's been injured, or in 2007, obviously, Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso are taking points off each other at McLaren. I can't see any situation that's like that that's going to give Vettel any hope, really. So unless Mercedes drop the ball, and at the moment that doesn't look very likely, I think Ferrari had their chance to get a long way ahead and haven't taken it.
Now, Scott, Singapore was supposed to be the weekend where Ferrari would turn it around. Why did the weekend unravel so much for them?
I think part of it was them having a messy weekend. Vettel, especially, obviously we saw the mistake in Friday. He said that he didn't have a very good qualifying session. The team then got the strategy wrong in the race, so they sort of shot themselves in the foot, not for the first time this season. But there's also Hamilton being astonishingly good, delivering that lap in qualifying that Toto Wolff said was stardust, the best he's ever seen. Every superlative you could find, I think, was attributed to Hamilton there. And then also a lot of credit goes to Mercedes for turning around their fortunes on a track that has historically been so weak for them, even in this all-conquering era that they're in at the moment. So it was just Hamilton and Mercedes just in being absolutely unstoppable. And it was we said before the weekend that this is the one that Vettel has to win. Vettel has to win this. If he doesn't win this, it's done. But can Mercedes and Hamilton really steal another one? That just seems so unlikely, given how many they've stolen
before the
this year.
weekend, we were talking about the Mercedes lining up 5th and 6th on the grid, and if they could get a podium, that would be a good result.
Exactly, and they've turned it around. And this is the thing, like Hamilton's doing so well at the moment that you think that this is probably him at his peak. I don't think we've seen him drive better than this year. It's probably the best he's driven in a title challenging season. And you talked about when Vettel was able to overcome Alonso because Alonso was in a weaker car. I think if you were going to put Alonso in Vettel's Ferrari at the moment, I still don't think he beats Hamilton this season. I think Hamilton's doing so well this year and driving so well at the moment that even Alonso in that Ferrari wouldn't necessarily beat him to the title.
What do you reckon, Kev?
I'm not going to agree with that. I mean, I'm not saying that Alonso would definitely win it, but I think if you look at the points that Vettel himself has given away, 25 while leading in Germany, I don't think Alonso would have done that. And that was actually more than a swing of 25, because not only did he lose the 25, he gave Lewis an extra 7 points. And Monza, I can't see Alonso being out-fumbled in that slightly ham-fisted, I've driven into the side of a Mercedes and had a spin way that Vettel did. So that's another few points as well. So once the gap's 40, that must come to around about 40, late 30s maybe. So I think we just have a championship fight on. And I think you're then down to which one of the teams can do the best job in the run-in, which at the moment it's looking like it's going to be back to Mercedes again. I think it absolutely, Alonso and Hamilton are so close that it would come down to that. Whereas I think that Vettel has just lost more points than he should have done really for a 4-time world champion this season.
I agree that Alonso would be closer than Vettel is. I don't dispute that in the slightest. I really rate Vettel. I think when he's at his peak, he is phenomenally good. But we also see much more chinks in his armour than we do any of the other leading drivers in that regard. And yeah, so Alonso would be closer, but I just think when Hamilton gets in this role, I talked before when we looked ahead to the Singapore and said, is there any chance of Hamilton going off the rails? And said, well, in Austria we saw that mental fragility that he has sometimes, where when it gets away from him, he can collapse. And what we didn't factor in is obviously the flip side of that is that when Hamilton gets on one of these rolls, he is a juggernaut. He is almost impossible to stop. When he goes on this sequence of wins or stellar performances, qualifying results, whatever it is.
As he did this time last year.
Yeah, exactly. So there's history there. And I think if you go back to that qualifying lap in Singapore, I genuinely think that Hamilton is the only driver on the grid at the moment capable of pulling that sort of lap out the bag. And it's that kind of special quality that I know I'm going to be accused of being a Hamilton fanboy here, but it is that trait that would give him an edge even over Alonso. Alonso, fantastic racing driver, but he isn't the best in qualifying. I think Hamilton has the edge on him, and at the moment F1 is decided mostly, especially when Hamilton's involved, on Saturdays. So I think that's why Hamilton wins.
I would agree that Hamilton has been the best driver this year, but my caveat to that is Lewis, I think he's able to get on this sort of psychological role because deep down he knows he can beat Vettel in a straight fight. I don't think he would have the same inner confidence that he could do that to Alonso in equal. I think it's quite good for him that Alonso's stuck in a car that hasn't been able to challenge him for the last years. I think Hamilton's mentality might be different if it was Alonso sat in that car behind him on the grid.
I disagree because Hamilton had Alonso in a straight fight 11 years ago as a rookie. And he's a much better driver now than he was 11 years ago. So.
Yeah, but I think that fight has even left. Even now he will talk about Alonso in positive. I think he's got a different approach to Alonso than he has to Vettel. Deep down in his mind, I think he knows he can beat Vettel because he has done. He doesn't know about Verstappen yet because he's the upcoming guy. He talked about this at the end of last year, and I don't think he really knows that he could definitely beat Alonso in a straight fight.
What's really interesting here, other than that debate, that was fantastic. I was just going to put my feet up and leave you guys to it. But the final point, let's look at a little bit more at Ferrari sort of operationally. We've had hesitance over team orders or instructions of when Kimi Raikkonen should get out of the way or how they handled them perhaps in qualifying at Monza. But the Singapore weekend, Vettel hits the wall in practice, loses his qualifying simulation and his race run. Then there's questionable tactics in qualifying. The cars end up out in traffic. They waste a run on ultra-softs trying to get through Q2 when Mercedes barely got through Q1 on those tyres. And then in the race, Vettel pits first, having done a great job to get past Max Verstappen. Fantastic racing from both of those two. But then they put him on an ultra-soft tyre to try and get to the end. And he ends up 40 seconds behind at the end, having surely given up at some point during that phase as well. But operationally, have Mercedes reacted to the challenge of Ferrari and found another level that Ferrari can't match?
Yeah, I think so, especially because the difference between the two partnerships this year is that we've had Mercedes trying to calm Hamilton down, manage Hamilton as well as the race and just say, okay, we might have made this mistake, but now you can make the difference. Or this is on a knife edge, you can make the difference. Or, okay, you need to come back now because of this. Whereas in the red corner, Vettel's basically managing the Ferrari pitbull as well as doing the driving. He's the one having to say, come on, we screwed up the timing there, think about that for the next time. He wanted to have a chat with his team after qualifying in Monza because they didn't. I think it was because they didn't quite manage the distance to the Mercedes, so he didn't get the toe. It didn't matter that he was given a toe to Kimi at Monza. It was because he wasn't close enough to get a toe off the Merc in front. So it's all of these little bits of mismanagement that is putting, I think, a bit more extra pressure on Vettel, because he is sort of doing more than a driver's job at the moment.
I think if you look at, to be fair to Ferrari, I think if you look at the season as a whole, you'd probably say Mercedes have had some bigger major blunders than Ferrari.
Yeah.
I mean, even when Lewis won in Germany, it was chaotic radio. Oh, I'm in the pits, no, I'm not. So I think if you look where Ferrari were a year, 2 years ago, when they made some real strategy blunders, they've come a long way. But I think you're probably right, now we're getting into the sort of smaller details when it's so close. They have. I think this weekend was about, we expected to be on the front. Oh, we're not. We need to do something to turn it around. We think we're still going to have race pace, and they got sucked into doing a
Well, they
strategy.
almost ended up overreaching to try and compensate. Whereas
exactly.
drivers say, when you make a mistake, forget it and just maximise the rest of it. Don't try and claim that time back. And it feels like Ferrari treated their weekend like that, and everything was about making up for what they'd already lost.
I think there's also an element of it. It kind of shows that Ferrari's not out to stitch up Kimi, because it's now stitching up Vettel in a slightly different way. You have all of these little things that in the past people used to claim this Ferrari favouritism thing, like leaving Raikkonen out on a bonkers strategy in China, just almost like they forgot they had a second car in the race. Budapest, where they forgot to attach his drinks bottle. And it's all, they basically have these little bits where you have mounting evidence and people go, oh, see, they hate Kimi, they don't care about the second car. And now they've screwed up a little bit the qualifying situation a couple of times. They've misjudged race strategies for Vettel in crucial scenarios. So that's kind of like, well, these are all part of the same thing. It's these small errors, and it doesn't really matter which driver it inflicts. They keep happening, and the worrying thing as well is there's different errors. It's just like they can't seem to string it together when it absolutely matters.